Tell me that you've been pruning tomatoes without telling me that you've been pruning tomatoes. In addition to turning your hands a fun shade of chartreuse, there are 3 reasons you want to stay on top of pruning your tomatoes at the end of the growing season. As we get to the end of the season, it's tempting to kind of disengage and check out because the garden is definitely less productive and it feels very much like fall. It feels like things are winding down. Avoid that temptation. There are 3 important reasons to go ahead and do this final pruning. First, concentrating on ripening the fruit. As temperatures drop at night, especially below 40 degrees, tomatoes stop ripening completely. And that means you've got a pretty narrow window to get these things on the plant ripe. And the only way to do that is to focus the plant's energy on ripening that fruit instead of growing taller, putting on suckers, setting blossoms, and trying to set new fruit. None of that's going to ripen. Focus its energy. I'll show you how to prune it in a minute to help make that happen. The second reason is disease. Usually, for most of us, fall into winter is a wetter season than our summers. And as you get those cool conditions with a lot of moisture, you get the ideal conditions for the spread of diseases that can kill tomatoes. The last thing you want when you're trying to do this final last gasp of ripening is for the plants to fall ill with a disease. And third and final, weed control. Part of what I'll do with the pruning is really cleaning up the lower foliage and making sure I can see the soil beneath the plant. If you have any weeds down there, you will have them potentially overwinter, drop seeds, and get snow and rain on top. And that creates the ideal conditions for those seeds to germinate and come back next year as a heavy weed load. We want to stop that in its tracks before we get into our wet fall season. As always, step 1, disinfect your cutting edges. I will use this tomato as an example. You can tell this one is an absolute hot mess, and the root cause of that is that I thought this was a Roma tomato. This is very clearly not a Roma tomato. I somehow swapped my tomatoes around in the course of my bottom watering this year of the trays, and consequently I ended up with a super sweet 100 that should have been on a trellis, has been kind of packed into a tomato cage. So that's definitely not helping, but I'll go ahead and use this to show you how hard of a pruning we're talking about here. Step 1 is to remove all of these growing tips and any suckers throughout the plant so that the plant will concentrate its energy on ripening the remaining fruit on all of these trusses. And then step 2 is to get into the base of the plant and clean out any leaves close to the ground. Starting in here at the base of the plant, removing these little internal suckers in the middle of the plant. And even just this quickly in, I've already found little weed, as well as, all the mustard seed that I dropped earlier this year. It's gonna be fun. Anyway, I'm gonna keep going. Generally, you want to leave as many healthy leaves as you can because these are the power factories for the tomato plant that will give it the energy to ripen the fruit. But if you see, leaves like this that are starting to get splotchy and diseased, it's a good idea to go ahead and remove all of those. There is our before, and here is the after. You can see the entire lower level and the interior is pretty cleaned out. I kept anything with an active fruiting truss. Tried to drape those on the outside so I would see them as they ripen. I left quite a bit of foliage up top to help power the rest of its ripening. But if you look down through the interior, a lot of space for airflow, shouldn't have any disease issues. You can see how much I took off. I probably removed, 60% of that tomato plant's mass. This is now a healthy, ready to go tomato that hopefully will ripen everything that's left on the plant before we get our first frost. One thing you might have noticed looking at that heap of material that I removed, I did cut off blossoms. Normally during the growing season, I would not prune anything with blossoms because those are about to become fruit. But this is so late in the season that if these were pollinated, first, there's no pollinators really around right now. Second, if these were pollinated, they would not have time to grow to fruit and ripen. It makes more sense to just remove these and again, focus the energy of the plant. And now I need to do the exact same thing for all the rest of these tomatoes. I've cleaned off the trellis back there. Just fruit, some leaves, no suckers. And then here was another mislabeled tomato. That one really is a Roma. And the other 2 final tomatoes we've got down the row here. There you go. Tomato bed, ready for the first freeze. And you might notice I've taken all of those prunings and left them on the surface of the soil. None of them looked especially diseased. They were just winding down and had some natural decay happening. After the first frost, when all of this dies, my plan is to trench compost it into the soil, including the stuff that's laying on top now. And then I will cover the whole thing with leaves and maybe a black tarp and leave it for the winter. This will have a chance to break down in the soil. But the basic idea is that all of the minerals and trace elements that these leaves took from the soil when the plant was growing will get returned to it when it is buried. And that will be part 2. That is it for part 1, the preparation for the first frost. Once we have our first frost and everything dies back, I will go through and show what I do after that to help build the soil over the winter and get a nice start to the garden next spring. If you have any questions or comments, anything I didn't address, drop it in the comments below. Otherwise, until next time, I hope that was helpful. Thanks.